It was a great neighborhood. I lived right down about 4 or 5 blocks from where we're standing right here. I lived on 26th and Yesler, and that was the neighborhood, as they call it, the hood.
After Pearl Harbor, the Japanese people, were interned.
Riveting, when you say riveting, that includes the mechanics, the everything, the sealers and all of that, as long as you're women. But one thing you have to remember, how to get dressed. You don't come out there with no belt pushers.
And then later, Mrs. King decided to come to Seattle. And she was 17 when she came. She came on her own. In fact, she lost her family. Her family actually died.
But William Gross is the guy who started the barber shop and the restaurant. And so basically, the Central District was created out of Gross's business and his family.
Like this is a picture of him with his Rainier View t-shirt and the rest of his classmates with him. He's the one with the R. And his hue is the same as the white students.
And somebody said, well, we don't want no white people in this, He said, well, I thought you wanted the best people. He said, if you don't want the best people, then you don't want me.
His wife's sister came to visit. She also brought one of her nephews with her, and I sort of got a crush on him. So I did see them in that light. I don't remember really seeing Doc Hamilton at all.
Felt comfortable going everywhere that he went to. The Black and Tan Club was a big one, and then the Rizal Club.
Oh, that was the beginning of a very rich history of coalitions, interracial coalitions here in Seattle.
We always learned 1852 roughly is when the Denny Party and others came, and then Seattle was set down. The Washington Territory, Oregon Territory did not have slavery, but there was still a desire to get cheap labor. So a lot of the kind of jobs that African Americans had under slavery, and the areas that were non-slave states, basically Asian Americans, Chinese, Japanese, Filipinos, ended up doing the jobs that African Americans had. For African Americans coming into Seattle, Central District was a very free place compared to Chicago, compared to New York. So usually the migration is South Carolina, with the biggest slave state. Oftentimes they went over to New York City and then they go to Chicago. In Chicago, they went ahead and went to the West Coast. When they went to the West Coast, there were a number of African Americans already here. There was the first guy is George Washington Lopez, I think, and then it was another person, William Gross, eventually. But William Gross is the guy who started the barber shop and the restaurant. And so basically, the Central District was created out of Gross's business and his family, where his family settled. So the wealthier African Americans lived on East Madison. The poorer ones lived on Yesler. And so Yesler became the convergence point between where the Asians were at and where the African Americans were at. It wasn't just Yesler, it was also Jackson Street, which is why you have the Jackson Street Brigade. And Atlantic Street was where eventually, as Chinese were excluded, Japanese Americans came. And Japanese American Japantown back then went all the way to Dearborn, where the area of Goodwill is now. So a lot of the neighborhoods end up collapsing together. In fact, as time goes on, because after Japanese Americans were incarcerated, African Americans moved into many of their homes, which is why Central District goes all the way down to Massachusetts now. Okay, which wasn't the way it was before. But again, the thing that was going on back then is everybody was converging, and because it smelled around Yesler, all people of color had to live east of Occidental Street. So it merged over time to Occidental Street, which means Westerner. All of us Orientals, meaning Easterner, had to live east of Occidental. So everybody, it didn't start out well. A lot of us didn't like each other. Chinese didn't like Japanese. Japanese may not like African Americans. But the main thing is, over time, familiarity and such, you kind of see through what people what have been said about each other. And so over time, all of us came together. And this is why a lot of us say it's become Central District South Seattle.
President Roosevelt, Franklin D. Roosevelt, and his wife saw that as black people we wasn't getting any work or didn't have anything to do. So they set up what was called the NYA that took the girls in. so that we could, and promised us a job. They told us if we came to Bowens, we could get a job. So we went to Bowens in Wichita. And when we got there, well, they didn't have any work there for us, so then they said, well, you can go to Washington. So naturally, we didn't know what Washington was or where it was. So we went back and we told our caretaker. She says, oh, so you guys going to see the president? You're going to see the president. So he says, okay. So we went back the next day and he pulled a map from over the table and says, now here's what I want you to know what's going. He said, this is Kansas. But instead of you guys going all the way over here to Seattle, Washington. So we had, one girl said, oh, that's the end of the world. That's the end of the world. So we can't go there. And he said, no, it's not that bad. I said, but you talk it over with your woman that's keeping you. And if she agrees, well, you can go. So we got there. Well, I was the only one that went over there with them. So they said, well, you got to do something. So I don't know what I'm going to do. I said, you didn't tell me what to do. He says, well, I said, I know what. I said, you guys got piles of shavings everywhere I look. There's a pile here and a pile there. And I said, I'll get a broom and a waste basket and the deals to put it in. So then one guy got smart. Said, oh, she piles it here, she piles it there. Said, we supposed to be the pilots, So they named me the pilot girl. So anyway, but that worked. And pretty soon they had an opening back in the shop, in Bowen's shop.
I was born in 1923, January, here in the Seattle area, 17th and Madison. And then I moved to 22nd and Cherry. I went to school at Horace Mann for a while. I went to Rainier. From Rainier, I went to Garfield. And from Garfield, I worked at Boeing's and went to war. And decided I didn't want to build airplanes, I wanted to be in them. So I took care of that. It was easy to enlist. I didn't have any problems there at all. It was kind of routine, really, because all of us in the neighborhood, a dozen kids my age, most of them enlisted in the Navy. I enlisted in the Air Force, Air Corps, and I didn't get called right away. I hung around and playing basketball with the neighborhood, and one by one they'd be leaving, and pretty soon there was nobody to play basketball with. It was a great neighborhood. I lived right down about 4 or 5 blocks from where we're standing right here. I lived on 26th and Yesler, and that was the neighborhood, as they call it, the hood. We were buddies. We played marbles all the time. And we got in fights a few times. One time, the fight was my using the N-word on him. He didn't like that. Even then, as a kid, well, they didn't like that word. I didn't know what it was just language. We got into it after that. Right away. So I didn't say that anymore. We're still friends. Oh, I've always been his friend,
Well, the difference between pre-World War II and World War II itself was like night and day. We lived a pretty simple existence off of 28th and South Jackson at that time. And after the war started, everything changed because my father became an air raid warden. There were nightly curfews, which we kids were off the street by 6 o'clock, and everything sort of changed. Plus the war was going on, and every day was nothing but unrelenting death and fury and blood. My biggest relief was when the war ended, because we were through with all of that. There was no more darkness. Everything resumed to normal. Going back to church was normal. Having relatives over for picnics was normal. All of those things were suspended during the war. Going to church was an adventure because our church, Mount Zion Baptist Church, was about 3 or 4 miles away. And sometimes we had a car, sometimes we didn't have a car. Most of the time we had to walk.
When Pearl Harbor was bombed, I was playing football on between 26th and 27th on Washington Street, Seattle, half a block from my house. I didn't believe it. The word got out. We played football on Sundays and weekends, whenever. So.
When the Japanese attacked Pearl Harbor, our west coast became a potential combat zone.
After Pearl Harbor, Japanese people, were interned. May, that's when they interned. But I was 16, and because I thought I was a vocation. There's nobody else, and that's what I was raised with.
That period of time was very troubling for me, and made it even more troubling because after the war, so we had a very mixed cosmopolitan neighborhood, and some of my best friends as it turned out, were Japanese.
When they said I was the enemy, man, a typical 16-year-old kid, I went down and registered and told the lady, "Here I am, take me,"
The principal called us all to an assembly, and he announced that all the Japanese children were going to be sent away. And I just remember crying, and all of the kids started crying.
So it was midnight, and I was sitting there, and all of a sudden I started to think, wow, what are they going to do with us? I wasn't that 16-year-old cocky kid no more. Now I wondered what's going to happen. The first thought was, oh, they're going to take us out and shoot us. I didn't know. Then I thought again, and I said, oh, damn, maybe they're going to send us to Japan.
It caused a lot of heartbreak and a lot of I don't know what in me. It wasn't until they came back that I sort of fell whole again. I really felt like a child in a hole in his heart.
But in the meantime, I watched this sergeant lean over a lady, and I was wondering what he was up to. But anyway, I hear him walk back and forth, and he come back carrying a big army overcoat, and he covered up that lady. Well, right then, I thought, well, he's not that bad of a guy.
It's probably the children who are influenced most by the way they live. They're going to grow up in the United States. It's their country. They may not object to the dust and wind of a relocation center.
So early in the morning, he walked down the aisle. He looked at me and I looked at him, and he stopped. He says, "You want a hot cup of cocoa? And come on with me." So I followed him back in the military truck. And he sat me on a duffel bag, poured me a hot cup of cocoa. So we got pretty close. And he talked to me about his uniform, that he didn't believe in what he was doing was right, but since he's wearing a uniform, he has to take orders. That's why he wanted me to understand that.
At the time, I was based out of France. We moved from England to France. It was shut down. We all bailed out. We kind of met most of the crew in one spot. 3 or 4 of them. The gunners, we never did see them. I don't know what happened to them. Co-pilot had a couple of days off until they found him. I hit the ground and they were there. Actually, it was farmers, civilians. and they didn't treat us too well. A navigator and I were together. Pretty soon some German soldiers came, and they stopped all that. Took my watch, gave me a receipt for it. I still have that receipt. I'd like to take it back and get my watch. I didn't know about the Holocaust until I got out, but prior to that time, when we were liberated, a lot of the POWs went off base, so to speak, and got into this small town, and there was a flak school there, a German flak school, and somebody came back into the room and says, "Hey, there's an Eskenazi in there." I didn't want to leave the base for any reason. I was kind of chicken, I guess. I don't know, but I just stay in one place until it was ready to go. It happened so fast that we didn't have time to think about it other than reading about it, that all our friends were being taken away, and didn't know where they were going. And it was something the President of the United States said they had to leave, so he's got the upper hand. We did have a name. We had, what is it? We named it, and we had a club, and we had pins, and we gave our pins to all the girls in the neighborhood. I think it was JAL, the Jewish Athletic League. We weren't athletic. Oh yeah, Garfield High School, there were a lot of Japanese. And I remember them being taken away and closing the beautiful sports store and fishing store on 3rd and Yesler. There was a family there that they had to bug out. They couldn't bug, they were thrown out.
And so we just did not go in certain areas because there would be problems. You know, in fact, some areas we knew, you know, there were guys waiting to clean our clock, so to speak, so we didn't. Our parents told us to go up to Jackson Street, straight up to Jackson Street, and then walk straight down Jackson to East Olive, and then go up East Olive. And that was a safe corridor. That's what we did. We didn't deviate from that. We didn't go down from 23rd Avenue down to 24th or 25th, because there would be problems, because we were surrounded by whites. It wasn't any big problem. It was the only problems we had when we deviated, and we didn't deviate very much. During the war brought many blacks here to Seattle, and particularly after the war. They would come through in the Army, and as a Navy man or a merchant marine man or whatever, and they fell in love with Seattle because it was so much more open than what they experienced wherever they came from. Came back to Seattle to live, to make a home, to make their life here. And they basically lived in the CD, and it became sort of like Black Seattle. They were called Central Area, but when they called Central Area, they meant this is where the blacks are. No, Leschi was about almost a mile from my house. And it was sort of like interesting because again, we were traversing into sort of like enemy territory, so to speak, because on the other side of Jackson Street, that was primarily white. So we would take the safe way and go up to Jackson Street, then walk up to 31st, and then down 31st, and 31st is sort of like a thoroughfare. There was a lot of cars going back and forth, and so we would run down 31st because on one side there was the houses, and on the other side there was what we call the Big Woods, which is still there today, and straight down to Yesler, and then we were home free.
The way to get the start, the one that really helped you out, it's not assimilation. It's going to your ethnic enclaves, getting help from your ethnic enclaves. Even to this day, I would say for a lot of my Vietnamese, Cambodian, or Khmer and Lao students, you get a lot more help if you go to the ethnic enclaves. So it's not just a neighborhood, but it's a place where you have businesses and centers serving your community, where you don't have to explain so much anymore. Yes, it was created because of restrictive covenants, animosity directed toward us, but ultimately nowadays a lot of us say, we actually prefer to be with our own people. Not that we mind other people, but you want to take the strength. You still need that support. You need people to understand where you're coming from. And of course, if I have money to move out, I have money to put in back in my community. And I think you see that in the growth of the Central District. A lot of African Americans want to live in the Central District. It's just being gentrified out because of money. You see the desire to maintain a lot of the ethnic enclaves. You need a place to find support. You want a place, not just a neighborhood, but where you have the services, where you have the businesses catered toward you. I know I'm gonna get the best price restaurants for Chinese people in the Chinatown area. Filipinos started coming into Seattle at about 1920s, and that's because 1924, we excluded everybody east of the Ural Mountains. But in America, many of the children, the grandchildren of the immigrants, you're growing up together. Similarly with the African American Central District, you're all growing up together. So I hear a lot of stories about how people really didn't like each other. And I could tell when I went to some of my friends' house, they don't like Chinese, we may not like blacks, we not like Mexicans and so forth. But the kids don't have the problem. And eventually as they meet the kids, right? People end up liking blacks, Asians, Latinos, Jewish people a lot more than they thought they would. And this is why a lot of us will say, Seattle is not marked by a lot of the racial fights that other cities are, where you really have a black gang against an Asian gang against a Mexican. You don't see that so much. Maybe in the newer communities of the Seattle area, but in the Central District, Beacon Hill, Chinatown, Rainier Beach, you really don't see that very often. Your bigger enemy is when you left the neighborhood. Right. It's the animosity directed towards you when you're white. And some of the things that they heard said about black people, about Japanese, about Filipinos, it came to offend a lot of people. But in Seattle, most of the people I know, the Chinese Americans and Filipino Americans, all talk about how bad they felt. For the Japanese Americans, their playmates that are being sent out. And I always thought it's because you don't really have a distinct Japantown, Chinatown, and so forth. Here in Seattle, this is why some people call it International District, although I think that gives it very little identity, because it started off with the Chinese. Going to the Central District in Seattle area, I would say it's more like if you want to get products and be treated fairly, you're more likely to be treated fairly by the fellow co-ethnic. Actually, African Americans were not segregated initially in Washington State because there weren't that many. Right. Later on, they were de facto segregated anyways. Same with Japanese Americans, whereas Chinese were segregated. But the main thing that happens is here, you see what happens to everyone else. These are your playmates. Yes, you may have those who are really thoroughly bigoted and don't care, but over time, most people saw that it was wrong, and that most people are okay. You hope that that's what happens with integration. So the more integrated neighborhoods were the ones with fellow co-ethnics.
Down Airport Way. So that's got back into that. In the meantime, we were living in a project called the Warmish Bend Project, was put out by the government. And when you get that, you could only stay there so many paydays, then you'd have to find a place of your own to go. So I said, well, it's getting time now for me to get out of here. So I said, when I had never been out of Seattle at anywhere downtown. So he told me, he says, okay, he says, what you do, so you take the number 32 bus, you go out to Madison, 22nd and Madison, and you can probably find, I didn't know he was trying to tell me that's where the black people live, you know. So I stayed there until, until 43, until 81. I retired in 1981. When I first started was 52 and a half cents an hour.
52 and a half.
52 and a half. But they were paying better wages than most people, even the shipyards. Everybody, they left the shipyard and they tried to get on at Boeing because Boeing was paying a higher price. You know, if that's whatever to be done, that's what you did. But I just stayed with the riveting. And the riveting, when you say riveting, that includes the mechanics, the everything, the sealers and all of that, as long as you're women. But one thing you had to remember, how to get dressed. You don't come out there with no belt pushers and things like that. You had to wear, we didn't call jeans then, we had to wear pants. And if you didn't have pants on when you went to work, Boeing's had a tool room with coveralls, and you could go and chuck out a pair of coveralls, or either you could go home and miss the whole day work. they had 3 shifts. You worked shift 1, 2, and 3. Morning shift was from 7 o'clock, and the second shift started about 3:30, and then graveyard shift. Well, I couldn't handle that graveyard shift because by the time it got 12 o'clock, I wanted to know where I'm going to sleep, and everything. So I remember one time I sat there and I went to sleep, and the supervisor came up and said, "Hey," said, you're supposed to be at work. I said, "No." He said, "I'm home." He said, "No, you're not home." Say, "You're at Bowens." I said, "Well, this past 12 o'clock." He said, "I know, but you." I said, "No." So what do you want to do? I said, "I'm going to wake up and go to work." So he said, "Okay." So he told me to get your gun and everything and showed me where to set up. You have to set up where you're going to rivet, And I said, "Okay." So I found out then a graveyard shift was not for me. Man, I didn't lose any time. I got thanks to Sherry that all that time I never lost a day's work. And so no, all I was concerned with getting my parents, getting my mother and my family here and get them their jobs, So they promised me that that's what I'd do when I got here, that I'd get my family. And it really worked out. I brought my whole family, a lot of other friends too. I inspired them to come to Bowens.
My name is Theodore Howard, Theodore Roosevelt Howard. Everyone called me Ted. My family is from Texas, which is where we found that Sam Bruce Jr., who's a Tuskegee Airman, was born, and found out that our grandmother, father's name was Joseph Bruce and Isabella Bruce. And Joseph had 2 brothers, and one was Sam Bruce Sr., which was Sam Bruce Jr.'s father. And that's how we related. We were related to the Wootens on our grandfather's side, and which is also a Tuskegee Airman. Several of the Wootens lived in this area. The Wooten that was a Tuskegee Airman, he when he got out of the military, he worked right here, and he died right there on the 14th Avenue Bridge. He fell off the bridge, and that's where he went through the war and flew the airplanes and came here and fell off the bridge, the 14th Avenue Bridge.
Jacqueline Alexander Lawson. Alexander is my maiden name. And I was born in Seattle in 1928. I was married to Walter Lawson, formerly of Louisiana. Walt was a policeman. We married in 1949, and we had 3 children. They were born in Seattle also. My mother was born in Seattle in 1899. Mom was born on a house that still exists on 28th Avenue, just off of Madison. I started noticing some of my favorite buildings, my favorite old buildings being torn down in the central area. And one of them, I think it's probably the most recent one, that was on 21st and Madison. Don't know if we ever knew of a name of it or not, but it was kind of a grocery store, but it's one of those that we young ladies didn't go into. Don't know why, but we just didn't. We went to school at Longfellow, and then we went to the YWCA, which was kind of across the street. But I really wanted that building designated as a historical site. And the next thing I knew, it was down. And it made me mad.